everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight. This PTA insurance program that we have at New York State PTA is a big part of my role as treasurer. And each time that we do events like this, I learn something new. And so I'm pleased to be able to join as well. Our most very special guest tonight, who will be our presenter, is Elgin Allen. Elgin is the founder and CEO of AIM Insurance Management. He is passionate about people and continues to lead the effort to reach new organizations in need. And I think we're about 5 years in with AIM, Elgin. So we knew we were an organization in need, and we came to meet with you, and it's been a wonderful partnership since then. AIM serves as one of our presidential alliance partners, and we are so appreciative of their support beyond this wonderful insurance program that we're able to offer all of our units. Elgin's going to be joining us in Syracuse. Those of you that were on a little earlier might have heard that. He will be joining us at our convention. We're going to be celebrating the 125th meeting, and I think AIM just had an annual celebration. Elgin, I'm going to turn it over to you to let us know what year it is.
Yes, it was the last time we were at in New York. It was our 30th anniversary, and so now it's our 32nd. So it's not as, we haven't been around as long as PTA, but a lot longer than most private businesses. So with that, I'll get started tonight, and we're going to talk about PTA insurance. We're going to talk about the coverages that you have. We're going to talk about how they cover you and why you need those coverages. And then we're going to talk a little about some additional coverage that you may not have, but you might want to consider. So first, we're going to talk about, or just do an overview of the coverages that every PTA in New York has. So you have general liability, you have commercial crime or bonding insurance, and you have directors and officers, or D&O. And I'll talk about each one of these in specifically or in detail. So the first one we're going to talk about is general liability. The general liability protects you from lawsuits resulting from bodily injury and property damage. Okay, so whether you're just having a monthly meeting with your parents and your teachers, and you're serving punch and some punch gets spilled on the floor and somebody slips and falls and injured themselves, that's a claim that's covered under your general liability. Or if you're having a fall carnival and you've got dunk tanks and pony rides and apple bobbing and all sorts of different hay rides, all sorts of different things. And if someone gets hurt during that activity, again, it's a general liability claim. We have PTAs that, they hold a lot of their events on school property. So while you're having your event, if somehow you damage school property, again, that's a claim that's covered under your general liability. So really pretty simply, general liability covers lawsuits or claims that resulted from bodily injury or property damage. Now, your general liability includes a separate limit of $5,000 for medical payments. So what this does is, if somebody just has a very, very minor injury and it's $2,000 or $3,000 to go to the emergency room, or a couple $100 to go see a doctor, your general liability will step in and pay up to $5,000 to reimburse somebody for medical payments, regardless of cause or fault. So there doesn't have to be a lawsuit. If someone gets injured and they want to get their medical bills reimbursed, the policy will reimburse those medical bills up to $5,000. This is really important to understand that this policy protects not only the PTA members, but volunteers and/or employees if you have any employees. If you went to your local insurance agent and you bought a general liability policy, they would issue a policy, and they would cover, in most cases, just cover the named insured, which would be the ABC PTA. But this policy is specifically designed not only to cover the PTA in the case of an injury, but also to cover any volunteers or employees that might be, or members that might be named in a lawsuit. So every PTA in the state of New York has a $2 million policy limit per occurrence with no deductible. Okay. Let's talk next about the commercial crime or the bonding insurance. What the bond insurance does, it protects your cash or your money against embezzlement, robbery, or theft. So embezzlement meaning if someone within the PTA takes the money for themselves, that's embezzlement. So the bond policy covers that. Robbery, we've had situations where a PTA treasurer is on the way to the bank to deposit money and they're carjacked, or they leave the money in the car while they're going into the grocery store on the way to the bank, and the money is stolen from them. So situations like that are covered also. We have a lot of PTAs that keep money in the administration office at the school. And unfortunately, the administration office has gotten broken into and the PTA money has been stolen. So there's another example of how your PTA money is covered. This is a really important coverage to have. Unfortunately, it used to be that our most frequent claims were the general liability with the slips and falls and paying for medical bills. But unfortunately today, and especially through the pandemic, when people are not really keeping as much of an eye on the money as they have in the past, we've had a very high frequency of bond claims. So your money is protected from anyone in the PTA who handles it or has access to it. Again, if you bought a typical bond from a local insurance agent, they would issue what's called a position bond. A position bond meaning they're going to insure the treasurer or they're going to insure the president, which is fine. But if the fundraising chairman or some other volunteer embezzles money from the PTA, then it wouldn't be covered under a position bond. But the bond coverage that you have is a blanket bond, and so it really protects your money from anybody who might embezzle it or take it from the PTA. Your bond limit is $50,000 per incident per PTA with a $250 deductible. Next coverage we're going to talk about is your directors and officers liability, or D&O. And this protects your officers from lawsuits resulting from wrongful acts. So your PTA officers are involved in making decisions on about how you're going to run your organizations, what vendors you're going to do business with, what products you're going to buy. So those decisions or the way that you run your organization is covered under the directors and officers liability. So just some examples of covered acts is, if you make a misleading statement, some sort of negligent act, discrimination, or misrepresentations. I always like to give a couple claims examples here to kind of help people understand how this coverage protects a PTA. We had a PTA that was having a monthly meeting. They thought someone, one of their members, was going to show up at the meeting that was going to be very disruptive. They thought this person might even get physically violent. So they called the local police department, told them what was going on. The police department said, no problem, we'll come and we'll sit in the meeting. If this person looks like they're getting a little disruptive, we'll just escort them from the meeting. Well, that's what happened. And there was a lawsuit filed against the PTA. Well, it wasn't covered under general liability. It wasn't a general liability claim because this person wasn't physically harmed when they were escorted from the meeting. But it was a directors and officers claim because this person took exception. They said that their civil rights was being violated, that they had as much right to be in the meeting and voice their opinions as anybody else. So this is a example of a directors and officers claim because the PTA took an action or made a decision that somebody else disagreed with. One other claim real quick, which is kind of a silly claim, but it really happened. There was a piece of property in a community and the PTA went to the property owner and said, if you would donate this basically it was a lot in the area or in the neighborhood. So if you'll donate this property to the city, we want to build a nice little playground for the kids to play on. And so basically that's what happened. And 6 months after the playground was completed, there was a lawsuit filed against the PTA saying that this playground had become detrimental to the community. Okay. Well, it wasn't a general liability claim because nobody got hurt there's no physical injuries on the playground, but it was a directors and officers liability claim because people took exception with the decision that the PTA made to build this playground. And once the attorneys got involved and drilled down to the case, what they found out was that a group of senior citizens had filed this suit against the PTA because the playground had created some additional noise in the afternoon. It was interrupting their afternoon naps. So really silly stuff, but it really happens. And so this is an example where the PTA really needed the directors and officers liability. So again, remember that it protects you for how you run your PTA and decisions you make about how you run your PTA. Okay. The policy limits that you have, it's a $5 million policy limit, and with a $25,000 deductible. And I know $25,000 sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. And we've been working for the last couple of years to figure out a solution to bring that down. So hopefully we can provide a solution to that this next year. The next thing I want to talk about is additional coverages that you can consider in addition to the package that you have that includes the general liability, the crime, and the directors and officers. So there's in addition to the general liability there are endorsements. There's actually 3 endorsements. Endorsements meaning you can add additional coverage. So there's extended medical payments, there's media liability, and then there's a hired and non-auto endorsement that you can add to the general liability. And then there's a separate policy, a property policy that you can purchase. And I'll talk about all these individually. So let's first talk about extended medical payments. And again, this is a GL endorsement, so it's added to your GL. What kind of protection does it provide? Well, it provides an easy access to reimbursement of out-of-pocket medical expenses whenever there's an injury. Okay. Well, I talked earlier about your general liability has a $5,000 limit for out-of-pocket medical expenses, but as this says, this is extended medical payments. So what this does is this extends the coverage, the $5,000 medical payments. So you can increase those $5,000 medical payments to higher limits. And what we find is if you have enough medical payment limits to cover the medical bills, then a lot of times that'll help avoid a lawsuit. Okay, so you have $5,000 limit, but you can extend that to $10,000, $25,000, $50,000 medical limits. As this last line says, you currently have 5. So let's talk next about the media liability, which again is endorsement to your general liability. What the media liability does, it protects you from liability or lawsuits resulting from social media. So when we talk about social media, we mean things like Facebook, LinkedIn, those sorts of social media. And you're protected from things like posting. You may have a PTA website. So that's websites considered social media. So if you were to post photographs without getting released on your website or on Facebook, that could cause you some media liability. And the policy is designed to cover that. If you were to use trademarks or logos without permission, if you made misrepresentation of information on social media, or if you accidentally made confidential information public. So these are just some examples of things that you might accidentally do in social media that could cause you some liability. We found this extremely important over the last couple of years during the pandemic, when people were staying home at more and communicating by social media. Next endorsement I want to talk to you about that you can add to the general liability is called hired and non-owned liability. And this one could be really important to your PTA. And what hired non-owned does is that it provides protection. It provides liability protection from lawsuits to cover you from hired and non-owned autos that are used in your activities that could cause bodily injury or property damage. So let's talk about what is hired auto. So hired auto is when you rent or hire automobiles, buses or cars that you might use in one of your activities. So if you're paying for school buses to take the kids to parks or take the kids to museums, then this could be an important coverage. The non-owned auto part of this is when it covers auto that's not owned by PTAs, and I don't know many PTAs that are wealthy enough to own their autos. So this covers autos not owned by the PTA, but owned by their members or volunteers that operate them during a PTA activity. So if you get volunteers, parents to volunteer to cart kids around in their cars, or if they use their cars to go and collect PTA materials or pick up PTA things for your activities, and something was to happen and someone was to be physically harmed or there's cause property damage, then this non-owned auto would cover that. An important note here is, though, that this is liability coverage for the PTA to protect the PTA and your members from liability or lawsuit, but it does not cover damage to the auto that are hired or non-owned. So if you rent a bus or you rent a car or a parent volunteers to use their car and there's damage to those vehicles, this rider does not cover the damage to the vehicles. It only covers the liability that might come to the PTA as a result of the injuries. So this can be a very important coverage for your PTA. Next, we're going to talk about the second policy besides the endorsements that you can add to the general liability, which is property policy. And what the property policy does, it protects personal property of the PTA against loss from, damage from an accident, theft, or natural disaster. So a lot of PTAs don't, purchase this coverage from us because they think that, well, we don't own a popcorn machine, or we don't own a snow cone machine or any tables or chairs, or we don't own, a computer or laptop that we use to keep up with our membership. But know that, this property policy also covers fundraising merchandise. So if you purchase fundraising merchandise, while that fundraising merchandise is in your custody, till you distribute that fundraising merchandise, you're responsible for it. Something happens to it, then you're going to be responsible for it, and the property insurance would cover that. We had a situation where a PTA bought $10,000 worth of wrapping paper for a wrapping paper fundraiser. They were going to purchase $10,000 worth of wrapping paper. They were going to sell it for $20 and make a $10,000 profit. So they took possession on a Friday night of the wrapping paper. They stored it in a portable building that they owned behind the administration building. And the plan was on Saturday morning, the kids were going to come by and pick up the wrapping paper. Well, Friday night, there was a really bad thunderstorm. The portable building leaked and ruined or destroyed most of the wrapping paper. Unfortunately, the PTA didn't have a policy to cover the wrapping paper. And so they had to purchase an additional $10,000 worth of wrapping paper. They had their fundraiser. They made $20,000, and they had to take the $20,000 and use the $20,000 to pay off the 2 orders of $10,000 of wrapping paper. So they went to a lot of time, a lot of trouble, and came up with no additional money for the PTA. $10,000 property policy costs about $100. So if they has spent or purchased the $100 property policy, they could have been reimbursed for their $10,000 worth of wrapping paper, had their fundraiser, and put $10,000 in their bank account. But this also covers things like, auction items. A lot of PTAs have auctions where they gather auction items over a period of time, and then they have an auction. So, these are just some examples of things that the property policy covers. So with that, let's open up the floor to some questions.
Thanks, Elgin. So I'm going to go ahead with some questions that we've already received through the chat box and stuff. And I'm going to try to keep them lumped together. So I just wanted to go right back to the general liability and just start out to confirm exactly who is covered. So again, if the PTAs are having family night and lots of people are in, besides volunteers, besides members, are the visitors or the attendees also covered by the general liability?
Yes. Typically what happens if there's a serious injury and the attorney, the parents decide to hire an attorney and file a lawsuit, the attorney is going to name anybody and everybody that, might be at fault. So whether it's a PTA member, whether it's a PTA volunteer, whether it's somebody in attendance that maybe contributed to or caused the injury, all of those people would be covered.
Great. And then the next question, I think Kyle is going to help us out with it as well, is I'm sure you've had this question quite a few times, but since it's kind of related to our New York State Department of Health guidelines, I'm going to ask Kyle to jump in as well. So again, we still have some concerns from some of our PTAs about holding gatherings and inviting groups to come in. And what would happen if somebody after the event received a positive diagnosis of COVID? So what would be the PTA's liability there, if any? And so I think we'll just switch right over to Kyle to deliver that answer.
Sure, and then I'll toss it to you, Elgin. So yeah. I'm putting in the chat box our COVID guidance for gatherings. That we worked on this with AIM. So you will see on the top of this document, and I'm just going to share it real quick. Hold on one second.
Do I need to unshare?
You'll see on the top of this document when I can share it. Please, I'm going to take your screen off for a second, Elgin. Okay. You'll see on the top of this document the New York State rules on gatherings and CDC and Department of Health. So these are state and best practices. We expect you to follow these real general safety rules: social distancing, masking, outdoors is best, etc. There are questions here that we have worked on for you to consider when having an in-person event. What's your vaccination rate? How are you going to protect unvaccinated students in particular? Because as a reminder, about 40% of our students over the age of 12 are not vaccinated. And of course, everybody under the age of 12 are not vaccinated. And then suggestions for meeting outside, parks, school lawn, if it's allowed by your school district. We have listed here the current Department of Health guidance, the current CDC guidance, etc. Some risk factors that you should consider when making these decisions. Scrolling, it's a very detailed document. It changes once a month. So this one is actually lasted now 6 weeks. It's just miraculous. And then again, information about insurance. Now this was developed with Elgin and Jamie, which is really fantastic. So you as PTA, I think, go through, and Elgin, you can reshare your screen if you want to put your question slide back up. You as PTA should go through that document. Again, I put it into the chat. It's in the resource guide as an addendum. Ask yourself these questions. Make sure you follow the guidance. There's not going to be personal liability if you follow that document. Okay, so I want to be clear on that. But again, you want to make sure you're careful. It is time to get back to PTA business. business, and that does mean PTA business in school buildings. It's also very important that you follow all of your school district's rules. Each and every school building may have different rules. As example, some of your school districts may require outside people to be fully vaccinated before they come into the school building. That is happening and is acceptable. Some people may require, like we do for teachers in New York State, either a vaccine or a negative test. Again, acceptable. Some school districts are not asking for that. So they're saying for PTA volunteers, you just have to mask up, of course, the full time, but they're not asking for vaccine status or a test. So we see a hodgepodge. Remember, we have 764 independent school districts. Each of them has their own separate rules on this. So those have to be followed. If you have specific questions, please feel free to give me an email, and I'm going to toss things to Elgin too, because I'm sure you're getting the COVID questions a lot. As a reminder, all communicable diseases have always been disclaimed from all insurance policies. So this is nothing new. But we have to just make sure we're following good CDC guidance, good DOH guidance, and we really are going to be protected. Elgin?
Yes, I would just champion what Kyle said. Unfortunately, there's not any insurance companies or any insurance policies that are covering, communicable diseases, pandemics, things like that. But if you're following, if you're taking the precautions, following the CDC guidelines, we think that there is very little to no risk to the PTA, because it's really difficult, if you're following all the guidelines, really difficult to pinpoint where that person might have contracted COVID.
Now, I will just add, we don't want to go around hugging everybody without masks on and sharing coffee cups and having snacks off the same plate. So that is a dumb moment. So let's not do that. But let's follow that guidance and we'll all be safe.
Yeah.
And for Joan, communicable diseases, things like flus and all of those things are all disclaimed. Anything that's transmittable from one person to another, even bloodborne pathogens, as example, are communicable diseases.
Well, thank you for that. I just reached out to the asker of the question to see if we wanted to add more to it, but so we'll continue on. Again, along the vein of liability, a great question that came in that's starting to be very relevant. PTAs often will have food trucks available to serve refreshments or for purchases as part of their activities. Is there something that we should do with the owner of the food truck, depending upon, and does it depend upon the venue? Like if we have them in the parking lot at school versus the local park where the PTA is having an event and they want to invite a food truck to participate?
Yes, it's always a good practice, whether it's a food truck or any other vendor. It's always a good practice to do business with vendors that have general liability. And if they have general liability, ask them to add you to their general liability policy as an additional insured. And what that means is if something, for example, food poisoning, if there's food poisoning and there's a claim filed, then their policy, you're insured under their policy will respond first. If for any reason those limits were exhausted, then your second line of defense is your PTA insurance policy. So it really just gives you additional coverage.
Okay, and so that takes me to the flip side. When we are being asked by the school district to include the school district as an additional insured, can you kind of walk us through that a little? Like why we're being asked that and what like the process is of what we should do?
Well, yeah, it's just exactly the reverse of what I said. It's very, very common for the school district to ask a PTA to add the school district to the PTA's policy. And again, what that does is it kind of protects the school district's insurance policy from having to get involved. And then it puts the PTA's policy as primary coverage. And so the PTA then has to defend or cover not only the PTA and the PTA members or volunteers, but also has to cover the school district. Now, the downside to that is, and I know a lot of PTAs are required to do that. A lot of schools are saying, you know, unless you do that, you can't have an activity on our property. But what you need to know about doing that is when you do that, you're sharing your $2 million limit with the school. So if there's a, you know, a lawsuit and the judgment is $3 million, then your policy is going to pay. You have a $2 million policy, so your policy is going to pay, you know, $1 million on behalf of the PTA and $1 million on behalf of the school, and there's still $3 million out there that between the school and the PTA, you're going to have to come up and fund that. So again, it's you know, preferable not to add the school because again, you're sharing your limits with the school, but that's what's happening if you do.
And so we are seeing that on an expanded basis across the state. So we're going to be looking at that from the state perspective of, is there any ways that we can work with that? So just that's just an aside to our units that are on the call. Again, we spend a considerable amount of time in the spring analyzing the policies and what we're offering and what people have been asking for. So thank you for that, Elgin. I appreciate it. So just, yeah. But if I need to do the additional insured, the way I do that is, do I fill out a form? Do I just email a request? Do I call? What should I do?
Yeah, you can just call us, you can email us, we'll send you a form so you can fill out the information of who you want to add and for what event you want to add them, and then we'll just issue a certificate of insurance showing the school district as additional insured. And I just like to say, kind of maybe put everybody a little bit at ease. You know, we've been insuring PTAs for over 30 years now, and in 30 years our largest settlement in a lawsuit was just over, you know, $600,000. So every PTA has $2 million worth of coverage. So even if you shared your limits with the school districts, you know, I feel very comfortable saying that I believe you still have adequate coverage.
Great. So now I want to switch just quickly over to the directors and officers coverage with an interesting question. If somebody wants to sue the PTA, or I think that's the way it would be, you know, for an officer for doing something wrongful, how would the PTA find out about that? How would it go just to the president? Would a lawyer contact the president? How does that all work?
Well, typically the way it works is that you know, the plaintiff, the person who thinks they've been wronged against, gets an attorney. The attorney drafts the suit, and then it's served to, you know, usually to the president or one of the officers of the PTA, and then they typically then contact us and provide us with the suit. Okay.
So again, if this happens, their first line of contact is both AIM and then us at yes. New York State if this situation comes up. So we're here to support as well. Okay, so now we're going to switch to some questions regarding the fidelity bond. And as you know, the reconciliations, which is part of the requirement we have to maintain that fidelity bond, which is, again, should be best practices for a PTA. And, you know, many of our units have been doing that, and now with the requirement, they just, you know, continue along with what they're doing. But we just really wanted to get some framework of the reconciliation. So the question is, how soon? So if a month ends, when the month ends, how soon should that reconciliation, or how much time do they have to complete the reconciliation of that prior month?
Yeah. Two important things to talk about that I didn't mention when we were going through the slides is that the bond insurance requires that, first of all, that you do an annual review of your books, or an annual audit, if you will, which is, required or encouraged by New York State PTA. And then the second thing is to have someone who is not a check signer, looking at the bank statement every month. And so we want that that person to retrieve, either have the bank statement mailed directly to them or retrieve the bank statement out of their PTA mailbox at the school and get that statement unopened and open it and go through it. And if you had a fundraiser for $10,000, then you should expect to see a deposit for $10,000. If you don't, it's a red flag. If there's checks in there written to the mortgage company and the grocery store and the dry cleaners and things like that, obviously those are red flags. So we really need somebody looking at those bank statements every month. And once they're reviewed and everything looks like it's in order, then the person reviewing needs to sign off on them and date them and then pass them on to the treasurer to do the monthly reconciliation, prepare the books. And obviously that review of the bank statement and the reconciliation by the treasurer and the preparation of the books should be done as quickly as possible, usually by the 15th or the 20th of the close of the month.
Okay, and if we have a particularly sharp unit that realizes even before they get their bank statement, maybe because they can look online or they recognize that already things are not falling or getting into the bank as they should be, can they move forward with the claim if just that past month's reconciliation hasn't been completed? They can still file the claim. That won't be a detriment to the claim.
It will not. It will not. And with online banking, we suggest that, multiple people are given, online access to be able to go in and look and see what's going on with the bank statement throughout the month.
Great.
It's really a great check and balance. We find that if everyone knows that there's multiple pairs of eyes looking at the bank statement, then people are less likely to, get sticky fingers.
Thank you for that. And then just as an aside, I think that kind of morphs into a question that we get quite a bit, and then that is about using some of the newer methods of fund transfer. I'm not going to just, because it's not necessarily banking, but things like Venmo and Cash App and that type of thing. We want to let everyone know our guidance is in its final stages and will be coming out. We have been very clear, especially about Venmo, that our guidance is that it should not be used by PTA because of the type of platform it is, peer-to-peer, and not involved with an association, and we would be considered a business. So we're very clear about that. Is there anything that you could add on that type of non-traditional transfer of funds?
Well, in terms of transfer of funds, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of that I want to, warn you about is email fraud. A lot of PTAs are getting emails, like supposedly from the president to the treasurer saying transfer or send money for whatever. And what they find out later is that it really wasn't it looked like it was the president. It really wasn't the president. But the treasurer went ahead and transferred or sent money based on the directive from the president. And so, if you're the treasurer and you get requests like that from the president or other officers, please take time to verify that it's not a fraudulent email.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we try to send out a notice, like a reminder, warning kind of thing every couple of months. I think, as treasurer for New York State, I think I get that type of email at least 4 to 5 times a month. And so, again, we do need everybody to stay vigilant because we have had some issues with our throughout our units. And thank you for your support of those units, because I know several of them have reached out to AIM. So that is the conclusion of the questions that we've received. I think that if we have, it's about 8:10. If we have a few more minutes, we can open up the floor, if that's okay with you, Elgin.
Sure.
I just have a question. I know we might have many new unit leaders in here. Talk about the red light list a little bit.
Okay, so one of the resources we provide is some people call it red light, green light, yellow light. We also call it, play, pause, or stop. So, green light or play means these are very safe activities, not a lot of risk, and you shouldn't have to worry about, claims arising from these activities. We have yellow light activities or pause activities that you should really think about doing, whether you want to do these or not. And if you decide to do them, they're, like the play or the green light, they're going to be covered activities, but they're more risky. And so you just need to be a little more prudent and take, we have in the risk guide, we have suggestions on how to make some of your activities more safe. And then there's our red light list or the stop list that says, these activities are not covered by your policy and you really shouldn't be doing them, because if you do them and something happens and somebody gets injured, you're not going to have coverage.
Thank you for that, and great question, Kyle. And I just, Kyle, we have it in the chat box, the link to the resource guide, which we have a special section just for insurance, and the play, pause, and stop list is there. And it is, you can just print that page. And I think for a treasurer and for a president, I think those are great things to print, to have, because at your meetings, when, the brainstorming of ideas is happening and people start talking and getting excited, you have a quick reference right there to say, wait a minute, we might want to rethink the idea to do this activity or that. So that was a great question, and thank you for the response on that.
And Patty, I just put in the chat, I'm going to put her on the spot. Dana, I know she's listening in. Dana is our insurance manager in the office, and she's fantastic. So if you have insurance questions, you can, reach out to AIM anytime. And I also put Dana's email here. She's fantastic. I also put Patty's email here. Sorry, ladies, I'm throwing you both to the wolves with Elgin. Shoot them an email because they're very responsive, and we'd rather have you ask the question first than not ask the question and get in a jam, if that makes sense. So AIM is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're so fantastic. And Elgin, we cannot thank you enough for all you do for our units and associations. It's just that our partnership working together with you has really transformed our association these past now 5.5 years. And then, Patty and Dana are always available too to answer your questions. So if you have any questions, no question is a stupid question. Remember, the only stupid question is an unasked question. So it's still confusing to me. I've been in PTA now for 6 years, and I still ask Dana, I think, an insurance question once a week, easily, where we get a unit. You can also, of course, go to your region director. And I hope if you don't know who your region director is, we can connect you. Your region director is always kind of that first point of contact for you all. So call AIM, email your region director. Their emails are all on our webpage. I'm assuming some of them are on here. I really can't see the participant list, but your RD is a fantastic resource for you. So make sure you're using them to the fullest, because they are there. They are there to help. Oh, and I do see there's Sonia. So I know Sonia's on here, and she would chime in. And Joan is a past region director. Your region directors are fantastic.
And Kyle, if I could just jump in on one more thing, and I apologize for that. We did have a couple of questions about the transportation rider, which, again, I want to just point out that that is something that's new this year, and it was certainly in response to some of the questions and some of the asks that we've had from our units. So we were pleased to be able to work with AIM to offer that. The cost for that rider that was discussed for transportation is $5 annually. So if it is something that your unit is interested in doing, you can check that box right away when you do your policy renewal, but you can do it midstream if all of a sudden you realize you have that need, and just contact AIM for that. It doesn't, at $5 a year, it just makes sense to just do it for the blanket coverage rather than to say, I have one activity, can I be covered for that? And then I don't want to be covered for another activity. So again, that you can reach out to AIM now to have that added on. I'm correct in that, right, Elgin?
That is correct. That's correct. And hopefully you can see my screen, and there's our email address and our phone number. So please call us with anything you need.
And I want to chime in, and correct me if I'm wrong, Elgin, Patty, and Dana, but next year we think that the hired auto is going to be in our policy. I think that's the plan, at least. So
Yes.
we may cover that next year. And then as a reminder, we're going to have zero deductible next year instead of that $25,000 deductible. So that's really exciting. And Elgin, I want to thank you and Jamie and Dana and Patty for all your work on that. It's just fantastic news.
Yep. Thank you.
And then I got a message just to me. So Elgin, can you talk a little bit about the $5 hired and non-hired audio? And you're right, you can pay for buses, and that's not what it is. And I was confused about that too. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because we're getting a couple messages on that.
Yeah, so you can contact us and we can add that coverage to the general liability that you have for $5. And basically what that does is it adds, coverage or protection for your PTA for hired and non-owned. So if you rent a car, or you pay for charter buses, and there's an accident, then that accident is covered under the hired and non-owned. Or if you have, again, parents who are using their personal vehicles in a PTA activity or function, and something happens, then again, there's liability coverage there for the PTA and all of your volunteers and members.
So
It's
Kyle,
it's a
Patty
huge
and Dana?
coverage for the price.
yeah, I think the distinction maybe needs to be made that we can't pay for school buses that are owned by the district. We can hire a charter bus,
Right.
and that would be covered. So is that the distinction between the two things?
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
And as a reminder, if your unit, as example, and this happens frequently, is for instance, contributing to field trips. There's a granting form, as remember, for everything you do with a school district. In the insurance guide, there's a granting form. So you're going to grant that money for the purpose to the school district, and the school district is actually going to pay that expense. You're granting the money to the school district. Just a reminder about that granting form. Patty, does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. And again, I want to just point out that one of the things that we've done with our insurance program in creating the play, pause, and stop list and having these webinars and getting the information out is we feel that if we can make sure that all of our units are fully informed, it will lessen our claims and help us to keep our program the lowest possible that we can charge the units. So we have been at this level of, for those of you that have one building, at $300 for the last several years. We are looking at that, and we are going to do our best to stay as close to that as we can. And if there has to be an increase, that has to be approved through the executive committee. We will make sure that everybody has plenty of warning if an increase is going to happen. And I just see one quick question. What if the school buses are not owned by the district? It's sort of, that would be the same thing if the, again, those buses are doing a school-related trip. I think that it would be that same concept.
Yes.
I know that a lot of districts are doing that now, where they don't own their own buses any longer, but contract with somebody to do that. But they're still considered their buses as through the contract.
And Patty, someone had asked if the rider is added for that coverage. There's no waiting period. It's automatic start, right, Elgin?
Yes, automatic. The day you call us, we can put it into play.
Right. And then also any of the other optional coverages, if you didn't select them at the time of the renewal, you can add them midstream. If you need media coverage, you need property coverage, you weren't aware maybe at the time of the renewal that might be something, you can add that now as well, and get that information from AIM to find out what the cost coverage would be for that to add it now. And then anybody, just a shout out to anybody who's on this call who maybe hasn't renewed their insurance yet. Let's make sure that happens tomorrow. You can ask for that renewal via email from AIM, and you can pay that premium over the phone. So it can be really quick and automatic. You can send your paperwork back via email as well. So let's make sure that every PTA has the coverage that they need and that they need for in good standing as well.
Yeah, I'm not
And I
gonna,
just
I'm
want
not
to
gonna,
interrupt. We've gotten a couple direct questions on the granting form. So in the insurance guide, and I know somebody, Elgin or Patty, Dana, you might want to talk about it, on page 20 of the insurance guide, that link we put there, I'll put it there again. There's a sample financial gifting letter. This is when you are, as a PTA unit, going to be spending funds, but realistically, you should not be making some of those purchases yourselves. You are granting those funds to the school district for use for them to make those purchases. So check out page 20. There's some more information there. Elgin, do you want to talk a little bit about that form?
yes, I mean, the gifting form is really important because we've found in the past, if PTAs buy merchandise and give it to the school, then there can be some liability that goes along with that. So if they gift the money to the school, then that diverts that liability and better protects the PTA.
Yes, and when you are gifting, you can, put that restriction on it that you are gifting for this particular item, program, etc. And if there are excess funds that aren't used for that, the school district should account for those funds and then return anything left over to you. I mean, that it's a way of making sure that the money is spent, because that was one of the common concerns about gifting the money to the district in the past was, well, we can gift it, but the district can, once they accept it, can do whatever they want with it. But so if you make the agreement in such a way using this grant form, then it will assure that the money is being spent as you wish. And again, the granting and the gifting also, by doing that, you're not putting the onus on future PTAs to do things. So for instance, if you buy something like a picnic table to, you want a picnic table, if you buy it and it's outside, and then every year, the custodians want to come to you and say, well, we need to have you pay for the paint or the stain to fix it up for this current year, you're really putting a future PTA on the hook for that type of thing. If you gift it to the district, then it becomes the district's role to use their supplies to fix up the picnic table every year. So again, that's just another cleaner way to make sure that, again, we're a year-to-year association, that we're taking care of our business separately each year. Okay, Kyle, have you received any more questions? I'm not seeing any further.
No, that was the last question I got. So thanks, Karen, for that granting form, gifting form question. I'm sure if other people had that question. Well, again, we do enjoy spending time with you, Elgin, and I think we hope to have you and Jamie back on maybe when it's closer to renewal time, so that when we're all filling out our forms, if we have questions, we can answer them right away. But in the meantime, we know that we will see you in Syracuse for our celebration of the 125th annual meeting of New York State PTA. So very excited for that. And we thank you for joining us and making the trip from Texas up to see us. Yep. And with that, again, just a reminder that both the recording and the slides will be posted to the New York State website within the next couple of days for your referral and to share as you wish. If we're good, we can say good night.
Good night.
Yeah. Good night, all. Thank you.
This
Lots
was
of
great.
thank yous coming in on the chat.